Worked 38 years for the same company, started on the floor, ended up in middle management. Nothing glamorous. I pushed paper, managed schedules, kept things running. When I retired at 63, my pension wasn't enormous, but it was enough. I owned my house outright, a three-bedroom colonial in Dayton, Ohio, that my late wife Patricia and I had paid off together before she passed. I had my garden. I had my routines. I had enough. That was before my son and his wife moved in. My son's name is Gregory. He's 34 now. Smart kid. Always was. Got his business degree, landed a decent job in sales, seemed to be doing fine on his own for a few years after college. Then he met Vivienne. I want to be fair here. I'm not going to tell you Vivienne was a monster from day one. She wasn't. She was charming, actually. Polished in a way that made you feel like she was paying you a compliment just by talking to you. She had this habit of tilting her head when she listened, like every word you said was fascinating. I liked her at first. I genuinely did. They got married in 2019. Small ceremony, which I paid for, about $14,000. I didn't complain. That's what fathers do. The trouble started quietly, the way trouble usually does. About 8 months after the wedding, Gregory called me. He said they were having a hard time with rent. His sales numbers had dipped. Vivian had left her job. She wanted to focus on building a lifestyle brand on Instagram, she said. They needed a place to stay, just temporarily, while they got back on their feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. They moved into my house on a Thursday in February. By the following Monday, I felt like a guest in my own home. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just small things. Vivienne rearranged my kitchen without asking, moved my coffee maker to a cabinet because it cluttered the aesthetic. She started referring to the guest bathroom as our bathroom. She'd have long phone calls in my living room, talking about sponsorship deals and content calendars. And if I happened to walk through, she'd give me this look. Not angry exactly, more like the look you give a child who interrupts adult conversation. Gregory didn't say anything. That was the part that hurt. I told myself it would be fine. Temporary. A few months. A few months became 6, then a year, then 2 years. By 2021, they were still there. Gregory had changed jobs twice. Vivienne's Instagram had maybe 8,000 followers, which I know because she told me frequently, like it was a number that explained everything. They weren't paying rent. I hadn't asked for rent. I hadn't wanted to make it awkward. But I was paying the utilities, the groceries, everything. My retirement savings were absorbing costs I hadn't planned for. I started doing the math at night, which is never a good sign. I tried talking to Gregory once. I sat him down in the kitchen, just the two of us, and I said I thought we needed to talk about a plan, a real timeline, when they might be looking at their own place. He looked uncomfortable, looked at the table, said Vivienne had some brand deals almost finalized that would change everything, said it wasn't a good time to add pressure, said he hoped I understood. I said I understood. I went back to doing the math at night. The dynamic in the house had shifted so gradually I almost didn't notice until I was already deep in it. Vivian had taken over. That's the only way I can describe it. She decided what got cooked and when. She had opinions about what I watched on television. Not aggressive, just persistent, always suggesting something else, always steering. She started hosting her friends on weekends. My house became a backdrop for her content. I'd come downstairs on a Saturday morning, and there'd be a ring light set up in my dining room, and 2 women I'd never met sitting at my table drinking coffee out of mugs arranged just so. I started spending more time in my garden. It was the one place that still felt mine. Gregory noticed I was withdrawing, I think, but he never said anything directly. He had developed this talent for being in 2 places at once. Present enough with me that I couldn't point to outright neglect, but always slightly tilted toward Vivienne, always watching her face for cues. It was like watching a man with a compass, except the needle always pointed the same direction. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon in March. I had been seeing a woman. Her name is Phyllis. She's 61, retired nurse. Lost her husband a few years before I lost Patricia. We'd been introduced through my neighbor Frank. Started having coffee, then dinners. It had been about 4 months. I was happy. the kind of quiet happy I hadn't felt in a long time. I told Gregory about Phyllis over dinner one night. I was actually nervous telling him, which says something, doesn't it, that a man over 60 feels nervous telling his own son he's been seeing someone. Gregory smiled, said that was great, he was glad. Vivienne said nothing, just smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. 2 weeks later, I asked if it would be all right if Phyllis came to dinner on Saturday. Nothing fancy. I just wanted to cook a meal, introduce her properly, share something that made me happy with my family. Vivienne said, and I'm quoting as best I can remember, "I don't know if that's the best idea right now. We have a lot going on. I just don't think I'm in a place where I can host. I want you to sit with that for a moment." She told me she wasn't in a position to host. In my house, that I had owned for 26 years, that I paid the mortgage on, the taxes on, the electric bill on, that her name was not on in any legal document anywhere. I looked at Gregory, he looked at the table. I said, "I'll cook. You don't have to do anything." Vivienne said she just thought it might be awkward, given that it was a new relationship, and maybe we should wait until things were more settled. I nodded. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed Patricia and I had shared for 31 years, and I stared at the wall for a long time. That night I started making phone calls. Not angry phone calls, careful ones. I called my attorney, a woman named Helen who'd handled Patricia's estate and whom I trusted completely. I explained the situation. She laid out my options clearly. Gregory and Vivienne had no lease, no legal tenancy agreement, which meant they were month-to-month licensees at best. And since money had never exchanged hands, even that was arguable. In Ohio, the process to remove a family member without a lease is still a formal one. I would need to provide written notice. Helen said 30 days were standard. She said I could have the paperwork ready within a week. I said give me a little more time. I wasn't ready yet. I also called my financial advisor, a man named Ted who'd managed my retirement accounts for 15 years. I walked him through how much I'd been spending on additional household costs over 3 years. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "Howard, do you know what that money would have done sitting in your accounts instead?" I told him I could guess. He told me the actual number. I put the phone down and stared out the window for a while. The following Saturday, I invited Phyllis to dinner. I didn't ask permission. I called her Thursday, said I was making my chicken piccata, and asked if she was free. She said absolutely. Saturday afternoon, Vivienne came into the kitchen while I was cooking. She asked who was coming over. I said Phyllis. She got very still in the way people do when they're deciding whether to make a scene. She made a scene. Not loud, Vivienne was never loud. It was the cold, controlled kind. She said I was being inconsiderate of her space. She said she had a migraine and had planned a quiet evening. She said she didn't understand why I couldn't respect the boundaries of their home. Their home. I turned down the burner. I set down my wooden spoon. I said very calmly, "Vivienne, this is my house. Phyllis is coming for dinner. You're welcome to join us or to spend the evening in your room, but I want to be clear about something. This conversation is the last one we're having like this." She stared at me. I turned the burner back up. She went upstairs. Gregory came downstairs about 20 minutes later, looking uncomfortable, and said Vivienne was upset. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said maybe it would be better if Phyllis came another time. I said Phyllis was coming at 6 o'clock and I was looking forward to it. He looked at me for a long moment, then went back upstairs. Dinner with Phyllis was lovely, actually. We ate at my dining room table. My table, the one Patricia and I bought at an estate sale in 1997, and we talked for 3 hours. Phyllis had brought a bottle of Riesling. I had made the piccata and roasted asparagus and a lemon tart. It was the best evening I'd had in months. The next morning I found a text from Gregory on my phone. He had sent it at 11:47 p.m. I want to share it with you because the words still sit in my chest when I think about them. He wrote, "Dad, Vivienne is really struggling with this living situation. She doesn't feel comfortable in her own home anymore. Honestly, maybe it's time you thought about finding somewhere else to stay. We could look at some senior living places if the house feels like too much. You wouldn't have to deal with the upkeep. I think it would be better for everyone." I read that 3 times. Senior living. My son was suggesting I move to a senior living facility. Out of the house my wife and I built our life in. Out of the house where I grew tomatoes and fixed the gutters myself and painted every room with my own hands. Out of the house that, according to every piece of paper that existed in the world, was mine. I set my phone down on the nightstand. I got up, put on coffee, and went out to sit on my back porch in the early morning. The garden was just starting to come up. I'd planted tulip bulbs in October and they were pushing through. Patricia had always loved tulips. I sat there for a long time. Then I went inside, picked up the phone, and called Helen. I said, "I'm ready." She had the notice drafted by Wednesday. A formal 30-day notice to vacate delivered to Gregory by certified mail, which felt strange, mailing something to my own address, but Helen said it needed to be done properly. She also sent a copy by text to his phone number, which she advised as a supplemental measure. I didn't tell him it was coming. He called me 20 minutes after the certified mail notification hit his phone. He was not the Gregory who had sent that measured, careful text. He was loud, then quiet, then pleading, cycling through all of it. He said there had to be a misunderstanding. He said Vivian was devastated. He said I was abandoning him. I let him finish. Then I said, "Gregory, you asked me to move to a senior living facility so your wife could feel comfortable in my house. I've thought about it carefully. I think it's time you and Vivienne found a place of your own." He said I was being vindictive. I said I was being a homeowner. He said he needed more time. I said 30 days was more than fair by Ohio law and that Helen was available if he had legal questions. He hung up. Vivienne sent me 3 texts that afternoon. The first was an apology, genuine sounding, detailed. The second walked back the apology and explained why I had made things impossible. The third asked if we could talk. I replied to the third one. The notice stands. Please reach out to Helen's office if you have questions about the process. Helen's number was already in the notice. I want to tell you about the 30 days because they weren't easy. I'm not going to pretend this was some clean, triumphant thing where I felt nothing. Gregory and I barely spoke. He made a few more attempts, showing up at my bedroom door in the evening, wanting to talk, saying maybe we could work something out. I heard him out each time. I didn't change my answer. It was the hardest thing I'd done since sitting in the hospital the night Patricia died, and I want to be honest about that. But I also want to be honest about something else. Every morning during those 30 days I woke up, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. I felt like I was in my own life again. Gregory and Vivienne moved out on April 19th. I know the exact date because I wrote it down. They'd found an apartment in Kettering, a 2-bedroom, which I knew, because Gregory told me, maybe hoping I'd offer to help with the deposit. I'm not sure. I didn't offer. The day they left, I stood in the doorway of what had been their room. Someone had put a small nail hole in the wall where Vivian had hung one of her ring lights. There were rectangles of slightly brighter paint where her canvases had blocked the light. The closet still smelled faintly of her perfume. I opened the window. I let the April air in. Then I went downstairs, made a pot of coffee, and called Phyllis. I told her they were gone. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Howard, how do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Like I can breathe." She came over that weekend. We sat on the back porch and she helped me identify which of my seedlings were coming up strong and which needed more light. She knew about gardens. Her late husband had kept one too. We talked about Patricia. We talked about her husband, whose name was Dennis. We stayed outside until the sun went behind the tree line and it got too cold. It was a good afternoon, the first of many. Gregory and I didn't speak for almost 2 months. Then he called on a Sunday in June. He was calmer than he'd been in a while. He said he was sorry for the text he'd sent, the one about senior living. He said Vivian had actually suggested it and he'd thought it sounded reasonable at the time. He said he could see now how it had sounded. He said he wasn't sure about a lot of things. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. We didn't repair things in that phone call. Relationships don't repair in a single conversation, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but we talked for about 40 minutes, which was more honest talking than we'd done in 3 years. He told me Vivian's brand deals hadn't materialized. He was working. They were paying their own bills. He sounded tired in a way that I thought might actually be good for him. I told him the tulips had come up beautifully. There's something people don't tell you about standing your ground later in life. Everyone expects the story to be about anger, the explosion, the dramatic moment, the lines drawn in sand. But that's not what it felt like from the inside. It felt slow and quiet and very sad in places, and also, underneath all of that, deeply necessary. I didn't sell my house. I didn't have to. The house was never the point. The point was that I had stopped living in it. I'd become a visitor in the rooms I'd painted, in the garden I'd planted, in the life I'd built, and I'd let that happen slowly, out of love and accommodation, and the very human desire not to make things difficult. The moment Gregory's text came through, the senior living suggestion, something clarified. Not anger, clarity. The kind that comes when you finally see a situation for what it is, stripped of all the hoping and rationalizing you'd been doing. I'm 66 years old. I have, if I'm lucky, a good 20 years left that are genuinely mine. Phyllis and I have been talking about what next year looks like. Maybe a trip. She wants to see Savannah. I've always wanted to drive the Blue Ridge Parkway in the fall. My pension is stable. My garden is coming in strong. My house is my house again. Every room of it, including the kitchen where the coffee maker sits exactly where Patricia and I always kept it, right there on the counter where I can see it when I walk in. If you're reading this and you're in the middle of something similar, if you've been quietly shrinking to make room for someone who keeps needing just a little bit more, I want to say this. Your name on the deed means something. Your history in a place means something. Your peace means something. Your peace means something. And the people who truly love you will not ask you to give those things up. The ones who do are telling you something important about what they actually value. Listen to them. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in those 3 years. Not the events. I know the events, but the mechanism underneath them. How a person ends up a stranger in their own home without any single dramatic moment you can point to and say, that's where it turned. It happens in inches. Someone moves her coffee maker. You don't say anything because it's a small thing. Someone tells their friends your dining room is available on Saturdays. You don't say anything because you don't want to seem difficult. Someone looks at you like you've interrupted something important just by walking through your own living room, and you start walking differently, quieter, apologizing for taking up space you paid for. That's not love failing, that's self-respect being surrendered, one small concession at a time. I don't blame Gregory entirely. I watched him become someone who needed Vivian's approval more than he needed his own judgment, and I recognized something in that, because I had been doing the same thing in reverse. I needed Gregory's comfort more than I needed my own dignity. We were both shrinking ourselves to avoid friction, and the only person who kept expanding was the one who had nothing to lose by doing so. What broke it open for me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. When I read that text about senior living, I didn't explode. I got very still. The kind of still that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality and just see it plainly. My son, who I had welcomed into my home and supported without conditions for 3 years, had just suggested I relocate so his wife could be more comfortable. And he thought that was a reasonable thing to say. That told me everything I needed to know about how far things had drifted, not just between us, but inside him. The 30-day notice wasn't revenge. I need you to understand that. It was consequence. There's a difference that matters enormously. Revenge is about making someone feel pain. Consequence is simply allowing reality to do what it was always going to do once the accommodation stopped. Gregory and Vivian were adults who had been living as though they weren't. The notice just made that unavoidable. What I had to find in myself, and this is the part nobody talks about, was the willingness to be the one who ended the comfort. That's the hard thing. Not the legal paperwork, not the awkward conversations, the internal permission to stop absorbing someone else's choices at the cost of your own life. Intelligence without the courage to act on what you know is just a way of suffering more clearly. I knew for 2 years what was happening. Knowing wasn't enough. What changed was the decision to let what I knew actually change what I did. Phyllis asked me once, after everything had settled, if I had any regrets. I sat with that question honestly. I regret that it took me so long. I regret the 3 years of quiet self-erasure and the mornings I spent doing math I shouldn't have had to do. I don't regret the notice. I don't regret a single morning since. If you're somewhere in the middle of what I was in, still hoping things will shift on their own, still absorbing, still making yourself smaller to keep the peace, I'll tell you what I wish someone had told me at 63, the peace you're keeping isn't yours. It belongs to whoever is most comfortable with the arrangement. Your peace is the one being spent. Take it back, quietly if you can, firmly if you must. But take it back.